The hammer missed the nail completely, and Caroline Kennedy swore under her breath as her thumb took the blow instead, the sharp pain shooting up her arm making her eyes water in the unforgiving Oklahoma heat. She dropped the tool with a clatter onto the porch of her small homestead just outside Taylorsville, shaking her injured hand while the broken shutter continued to hang at a precarious angle, banging against the wooden siding every time the prairie wind picked up. It had been 3 months since her father passed from the fever, leaving her this plot of land and more responsibilities than any 22-year-old woman should have to shoulder alone in 1882. The nails she had been using were all wrong, too short and too thin for the heavy oak shutters that her father had insisted on installing 5 years ago when they first claimed this land. She had tried 3 times now to secure the left shutter, and each attempt had ended in failure. The general store in town would have the right supplies, but that meant hitching up the wagon, making the hour-long journey into Taylorsville, and facing the pitying looks from the townspeople who all seemed to think a woman alone could not possibly manage a homestead. Caroline wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her pale skin. Her dark brown hair had escaped its bun hours ago, and she knew she must look a sight. The vegetable garden needed watering, the chickens needed feeding, and now this shutter situation had taken up her entire morning. She had crops coming in next month that needed tending, and every task seemed to multiply into 3 more. The sound of horse hooves on the dirt path leading to her property made her look up sharply. Visitors were rare out here, and her hand instinctively moved toward the rifle she kept propped near the door. A lone rider approached on a bay gelding, and as he drew closer, Caroline recognized him as one of the ranchers from the big spread about 5 miles west. She had seen him in town a few times, but had never spoken to him directly. Warren Quinn brought his horse to a stop near her fence and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His broad shoulders filled out his worn cotton shirt, and there was an ease to the way he sat in the saddle that spoke of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. "Morning, Miss Kennedy," he said, his voice carrying that slow drawl common to men who worked the land. "I was riding the boundary line checking on some strays when I noticed your shutter situation from the ridge. Thought you might need some help." Caroline bristled immediately, her pride flaring hot in her chest. "I am managing just fine, Mr. Quinn." "Thank you for your concern, but I do not need charity." He did not seem offended by her sharp tone. Instead, he dismounted with fluid grace and tied his horse to the fence post. "Did not figure it for charity, just being neighborly. My pa always taught me that folks out here need to look out for each other. Besides, I have got nothing pressing back at the ranch for an hour or 2. She wanted to refuse him again, but the truth was she desperately needed help. The shutter would not fix itself, and she had already wasted half the morning trying. "I do not have the right nails," she admitted finally, her voice quieter. "The ones I have are too short." Warren walked up to the porch, his boots making solid sounds on the weathered wood. He examined the shutter with a practiced eye, testing the hinges and running his fingers along the wood. "These are solid shutters. White oak, if I am not mistaken. You need 3-inch nails at least, maybe some leather washers too to keep them from pulling through." He turned to look at her, and there was no judgment in his expression, only honest assessment. "I've got supplies back at my ranch. Could ride back and fetch them, have this fixed up for you in no time." "I cannot ask you to do that," Caroline said, but her resistance was weakening. The practical part of her mind knew she needed those supplies, and the nearest store was so far away. "You are not asking. I am offering." He smiled then, and it changed his whole face, softening the hard lines the sun and wind had carved there. Besides, my mama would tan my hide if she knew I left a lady in distress. Caroline found herself smiling back despite herself. Your mother sounds like a formidable woman. She was. His expression clouded briefly. She passed 2 years back. But I still hear her voice in my head sometimes, telling me to mind my manners and help those who need it. The shared experience of loss created an unexpected bridge between them. My father died 3 months ago, Caroline heard herself saying. Fever took him fast. I have been trying to keep this place running on my own since then. Warren's eyes filled with genuine sympathy. That is a heavy burden. This land does not forgive mistakes or give second chances. You have been managing all alone. She nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of those 3 months pressing down on her shoulders. There is no one else. My mother died when I was young and I have no siblings. Father and I worked this land together and now it is just me. Well, you do not have to be alone right now, Warren said simply. Let me ride back and get those supplies. I will have your shutter fixed before noon. This time Caroline did not argue. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I would appreciate that very much. Warren, he corrected gently. If we are going to be neighbors helping neighbors, might as well use first names. And may I call you Caroline? Or do you prefer Miss Kennedy? Caroline is fine, she said, and realized she meant it. He rode off with a promise to return quickly, and Caroline watched him go, feeling strangely lighter than she had in months. She went about her other chores while she waited, feeding the chickens and collecting their eggs, drawing water from the well for the garden. The physical work was demanding but familiar, and she had grown stronger these past months from the constant labor. True to his word, Warren returned within the hour, his saddlebags bulging with supplies. He dismounted and pulled out not just nails but also leather washers, wood oil, and even new hinges. Figured while I was fixing one thing, might as well make sure it is done right, he explained. Caroline felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Oklahoma sun. That is too generous. Please, let me pay you for the supplies at least. You can pay me back with a cup of water, he said easily. It is a hot ride and I am parched. She brought him water from her well, cold and clean, and he drank deeply before setting to work on the shutter. Caroline tried to return to her other tasks, but she found herself watching him work. His movements were efficient and practiced, each action purposeful. He removed the old nails carefully, examined the wood for any rot or damage, and applied oil to the hinges before installing them with the new hardware. You have done this before, she observed. Built most of the outbuildings on my ranch myself, he replied, not looking up from his work. Pa taught me young that a rancher needs to know how to fix what breaks because sometimes you cannot afford to wait for someone else to do it. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, still is, though he is getting on in years now. Handed the ranch over to me 2 years ago, said he was ready to take it easier. Warren positioned the shutter carefully and drove the first nail home with 3 solid strikes. He still gives me advice when I ask for it, though. You are fortunate to still have him, Caroline said softly. Warren paused in his work and looked at her directly. I am sorry about your father. I cannot imagine how hard it must have been to lose him and then have to take on all of this alone. The genuine compassion in his voice nearly undid her. She had grown so used to putting on a brave face, to pretending she had everything under control, that having someone acknowledge her struggle made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Some days are harder than others, she managed. He nodded and returned to his work, seeming to understand that she needed a moment to compose herself. He finished the first shutter and moved to examine the other 3. This one is loose too, he said, testing the right side shutter. and these bottom hinges are starting to rust. If you do not mind, I could fix them all while I am here. Would not take much longer. I do not want to keep you from your own work, Caroline protested weakly. The work will keep. This will not if another storm blows through. He was already pulling out more supplies. Besides, I am enjoying the company. It gets quiet out on the ranch sometimes, just me and the hands and a few thousand head of cattle. Caroline found herself curious about him, this man who had ridden out of his way to help a virtual stranger. How many hands do you employ? 6 full-time, a few more during branding and drives. It is a good crew. Most of them have been with the Quinn Ranch since my father's time. He worked as he talked, his hands never stopping. We run about 3,000 head, mostly longhorns, but I am starting to bring in some Herefords. Better meat, easier to handle. That is a substantial operation, Caroline said, impressed despite herself. It keeps me busy, but I like the work, like being out on the land, watching the seasons change, seeing the calves grow strong. He glanced at her homestead with an appraising eye. You have got good land here. What are you planting? Wheat mostly, some corn. A vegetable garden for my own use. Father had plans to expand, but that will have to wait now until I see how the harvest goes. She heard the uncertainty in her own voice. You have help for the harvest. I will hire some day workers from town when the time comes, Caroline said with more confidence than she felt. The truth was she had no idea if she could afford help, but she would figure it out somehow. Warren finished the second shutter and moved to the third. The morning was progressing toward noon, and the heat was building. Caroline went inside and prepared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and cold chicken left over from the previous night. When she brought it out on a tray with more water, Warren looked surprised. You did not have to do that, he said, but his eyes lit up at the sight of the food. You have been working for hours. It is the least I can do. She set the tray down on the porch bench. Please take a break. They sat together in the shade of the porch overhang, eating in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The wind had picked up, bringing with it the smell of prairie grass and distant rain. Caroline studied Warren from the corner of her eye, trying to understand why this man's presence made her feel both nervous and at ease at the same time. Can I ask you something? Warren said suddenly. Of course. Why are you doing this alone? I mean, I know you said you have no family, but there must be someone. A man courting you, maybe, who could help. Caroline felt her defenses rise instinctively. I do not need a man to take care of me, Mr. Quinn. I am perfectly capable of managing on my own. Warren, he reminded her gently. And I was not suggesting otherwise. You have clearly been doing a fine job keeping this place running. I just meant that everyone needs help sometimes. There is no shame in accepting it. She relaxed slightly, recognizing that he had not meant offense. There was someone, once. A man from town who worked at the bank. He courted me for a few months last year. But when Father got sick and then passed, he made it clear that he was interested in a wife, not a struggling homestead and all the problems that came with it. Warren's jaw tightened. Then he was a fool. The quiet conviction in his voice made Caroline's heart skip unexpectedly. He was practical, she said, trying to be fair. Not everyone wants to take on someone else's burdens. A real man does not see the woman he loves as a burden, Warren said firmly. He sees her as a partner. My parents worked this land together for 30 years. My mother was not just a rancher's wife. She was a rancher herself. She could ride and rope as well as any man, and my father never made her feel less than equal. They sound like they had something rare, Caroline said wistfully. They did. And it is what I want too when I find the right woman. He looked at her then, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. Someone strong enough to stand beside me, not behind me. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and an attraction Caroline had not expected to feel. She broke eye contact first, suddenly flustered. "You should finish your lunch. The food is better before the heat gets to it." Warren seemed to understand that he had ventured into territory that was too intense too quickly. He returned his attention to his plate, and they finished eating with lighter conversation about the town, the weather, and the upcoming harvest season. After lunch, Warren completed the remaining shutters with the same careful attention he had given the first two. When he finally stepped back to survey his work, all 4 shutters hung straight and secure, moving smoothly on their oiled hinges. "That should hold through anything short of a tornado," he said with satisfaction. Caroline examined his work, running her hand along the smooth wood. "They look perfect, better than they did when Father first installed them. I cannot thank you enough." "You could thank me by letting me come back and check on you from time to time," Warren said, and there was a hint of nervousness in his voice that Caroline found endearing. "To make sure everything is holding up, I mean, and if you need help with anything else." "I would like that," Caroline heard herself say, and realized she meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. Warren's face broke into that transformative smile again. "Good. I will ride by next week then, if that suits you." Next week would be fine. He gathered his tools and mounted his horse, settling into the saddle with easy familiarity. "You take care of yourself, Caroline Kennedy, and if you need anything before next week, my ranch is just 5 miles west. Anyone in town can give you directions." "I will remember that. Thank you again, Warren." He touched his hat brim in farewell and rode off, but he looked back twice before he crested the ridge and disappeared from view. Caroline stood on her porch with its perfectly repaired shutters and allowed herself a small smile. For the first time since her father died, she felt something other than overwhelming responsibility and grief. She felt hope. The week that followed was busy with the endless demands of the homestead. Caroline tended her crops, which were coming along well despite the challenges. She repaired a section of fence that had started to sag, mucked out the small barn where she kept her 2 horses, and tried not to think too much about Warren Quinn and his promise to return. But think about him she did, especially in the evenings when the work was done, and she sat alone on her porch watching the sun set over the Oklahoma prairie. She remembered the way his hands had moved so competently over the wood, the genuine kindness in his eyes, the way he had listened to her without judgment or pity. She had convinced herself after the banker's departure that she was better off alone, that relying on anyone else was just inviting disappointment. But Warren had planted a seed of doubt in that conviction. True to his word, he arrived exactly 1 week later, this time in mid-morning. Caroline saw him coming from far off, and had time to smooth her hair and wipe the garden dirt from her hands before he reached the house. She told herself she was not primping, just making herself presentable, but her racing heart suggested otherwise. "Morning," Warren called out as he approached. "Thought I would check on those shutters and see if you needed anything else looked at." Caroline could not help but smile at his transparent excuse. "The shutters are holding up perfectly, as you can clearly see." "Can never be too careful," he said with a grin that acknowledged the pretense. "But since I am here, is there anything else that needs fixing?" Caroline hesitated, then decided to be honest. "The well pump has been making a strange noise. I am worried it might be failing, but I do not know enough about pumps to diagnose the problem. Let me take a look." They walked together to the well, and Warren examined the pump mechanism carefully. He worked the handle several times, listening intently. "The leather seal is wearing out," he diagnosed. "That is what is causing the noise. It is an easy fix if you have a replacement seal, but if you do not, the leather will eventually fail completely and you will lose your water." I do not have a replacement, Caroline admitted, anxiety creeping into her voice. How long do I have before it fails? Hard to say. Could be a week, could be a month, but it is not something you want to gamble on. He straightened up, thinking. I have spare seals back at the ranch. I could bring you one, but it might be easier if you rode back with me now. That way you could see how to replace it yourself in case it happens again. The invitation surprised her. I could not impose on your entire afternoon like that. It is not an imposition. And truthfully, it would be good for you to know where my place is in case you ever do need help in an emergency. His expression grew serious. Out here, knowing where your neighbors are could mean the difference between life and death. Caroline knew he was right. She had been so focused on maintaining her independence that she had isolated herself dangerously. All right, let me get my horse saddled. I will help you, Warren offered. They worked together to saddle Caroline's mare, a gentle chestnut named Rosie who had been her father's favorite. Caroline noticed how Warren checked the cinch and stirrups without being asked. The action so natural it spoke of a man who thought of others without needing thanks or recognition. The ride to the Quinn Ranch took about 40 minutes at an easy pace. Warren pointed out landmarks along the way, natural features and fence lines that would help Caroline find her way if she ever needed to make the journey alone. They talked as they rode, the conversation flowing more easily than Caroline had experienced with anyone in a long time. How did your family end up in Oklahoma? Caroline asked. My grandfather came out here in '68, right after the Civil War. He had fought for the North and could not stomach going back to Missouri where his family was from. Too many divided loyalties, too much bitterness. He wanted a fresh start. Warren shifted in his saddle, eyes scanning the horizon in the automatic way of someone who was always aware of his surroundings. He claimed land, built a small cabin, and sent for my grandmother. They started with 50 head of cattle and a lot of determination. By the time my father took over, they had built it up to about 1,000 head. I have been trying to expand further, but carefully. Do not want to overextend and lose everything. That is sound thinking, Caroline said. My father was the same way. He believed in slow, steady growth rather than taking big risks. Smart man. This land rewards patience and punishes greed. He glanced at her. What about your family? How did you end up here? We came from Kansas 5 years ago. Father had been farming there, but the land was getting crowded and expensive. He heard about the opportunities in Oklahoma, the land available for claiming. He wanted something that would be mine someday, something substantial. Her voice caught slightly. He wanted me to have security. He succeeded, even if he is not here to see it. You have good land, and from what I have seen, you are doing right by it. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. They crested a rise, and the Quinn Ranch spread out before them in the valley below. It was larger than Caroline had expected. A substantial 2-story house built of white painted wood with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Behind it stood a massive barn, several corrals filled with horses, and numerous outbuildings. In the distance, she could see cattle dotting the grassland, more than she could easily count. It is beautiful, she said honestly. It is home, Warren replied simply, but she could hear the pride and love in his voice. Come on, I will introduce you to my father, and then we will get that seal for your pump. As they rode into the yard, a man emerged from the barn. He was older, probably in his 60s, with white hair and weathered features that marked him as someone who had spent his life working outdoors. He moved with a slight limp but otherwise seemed sturdy and strong. Pa, this is our neighbor Caroline Kennedy, Warren called out as they dismounted. Her well pump needs a new seal, and I told her I would help her out. The older man approached with a warm smile, extending his hand. Thomas Quinn, Pleased to meet you, Miss Kennedy. I heard about your father's passing. My condolences. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Caroline shook his hand, noting the firm grip despite his age. Call me Thomas, please. Any neighbor of ours is welcome here. He looked between Warren and Caroline with interest that he did not quite manage to hide. Warren, why do not you show Miss Kennedy around while I fetch that seal from the equipment shed? I can get it, Pa. I know where it is. You play host. Thomas was already walking away, leaving no room for argument. Warren shook his head with affectionate exasperation. He is not subtle. About what? Caroline asked, though she suspected she knew. About his desire to see me settled down with a good woman. He has been dropping hints for the past year that I am not getting any younger and the ranch needs heirs. Warren looked embarrassed. Not that I am suggesting. I mean, we just met. It is all right, Caroline said, finding his flustered state charming. I understand. My father was the same way before he got sick. He worried about leaving me alone. Warren seemed relieved that she had not taken offense. Come on, I will show you the operation. Might be useful for you to see how we manage things. Some of the methods might work on a smaller scale for your place. He walked her through the ranch, explaining how they organized the cattle, the rotation of the grazing areas, the breeding program he was implementing. Caroline listened intently, asking intelligent questions that seemed to please Warren. She noticed how he lit up when talking about his work, the deep connection he had to the land and the animals. They ended up at the horse corrals, where a dozen beautiful horses grazed peacefully. These are my pride, Warren admitted. I have been breeding working horses, trying to develop a line that is smart, strong, and calm-tempered, the kind of horse that a rancher can depend on in any situation. They are magnificent, Caroline said, watching a gray mare with a black mane toss her head playfully. That one is Luna. She is my best brood mare, smart as they come. Warren leaned against the fence, his posture relaxed. I will have foals in the spring. If you are interested, I could let you have one at a good price. Every homestead needs solid horses. I could not afford a horse like that, Caroline said regretfully. We could work out a trade. You must have something you grow that we could use. Or you could pay it off in installments over time. I am not worried about it. His casual generosity was both touching and slightly overwhelming. Caroline was not used to people helping without expecting something substantial in return. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked suddenly. You do not know me. I could be terrible with money or a poor farmer or any number of things. Warren turned to look at her directly, his creek-water eyes serious. I do not think you are any of those things. And I am being kind because I want to be, because helping you feels right, and because I like you, Caroline Kennedy. I like your strength and your stubbornness and the way you have not given up even though you have every reason to. Is that honest enough for you? Caroline felt her cheeks flush, but she met his gaze steadily. Yes, and I like you too, Warren Quinn. Which scares me a little if I am being equally honest. Why does it scare you? Because the last time I let myself depend on someone, he left when things got difficult. I do not know if I can risk that again. Warren was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. I cannot promise that I will never disappoint you, or that everything will always be easy. But I can promise that I do not run when things get hard. This ranch has been through droughts and floods, cattle disease and market crashes. My family has stayed through all of it because we do not quit. That is not in my nature. He reached out and gently took her hand, the touch sending warmth through her entire body. I would like the chance to prove that to you if you will let me. Before Caroline could respond, Thomas returned with the leather seal and a knowing look that he quickly tried to hide. Found it. Now, Warren, Why do not you fix Miss Kennedy's pump while I invite her to stay for supper? It will be dark soon enough, and I will not have her riding home alone at night. Oh, I could not, Caroline began. I insist, Thomas said firmly. We eat simple but hearty, and there is always plenty. Besides, it will give me a chance to get to know our neighbor. Warren caught Caroline's eye and shrugged as if to say his father could not be dissuaded. Pa's right about the dark. It would be safer for you to stay for supper and head home in daylight tomorrow morning. We have a guest room that my mother kept ready for visitors. The thought of staying overnight at a man's ranch would normally have concerned Caroline's sense of propriety, but Thomas Quinn's presence as chaperone made it acceptable, and truthfully, she was not ready to leave yet. If it is truly no trouble, then I accept. Thank you. Supper was a lively affair despite being just the three of them. Thomas Quinn was a natural storyteller, regaling Caroline with tales of the early days of the ranch, the challenges they had faced, and the triumphs they had celebrated. He spoke lovingly of his late wife, painting a picture of a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Martha could outride most of the men I knew, Thomas said with a reminiscent smile. She was fearless. Once when Warren was just a baby, a rattlesnake got into the house. I was out checking fence line, and she shot that snake dead with Warren in one arm and the rifle in the other, never even flinched. She sounds incredible, Caroline said. She was. Warren got his steady nerves from her. Thomas looked at his son with obvious pride and love. He is a good man, my boy, takes after his mother in all the best ways. Pa, Warren said, clearly embarrassed by the praise. It is true, and Miss Kennedy should know it. Thomas turned his attention to Caroline. What about you? What are your plans for the future? Caroline set down her fork, considering. I want to keep my father's homestead running successfully, prove that I can make it work on my own. Beyond that, I have not let myself think too far ahead. Nothing wrong with taking things one day at a time, Thomas said kindly. But do not be so focused on doing everything alone that you miss opportunities for happiness. Independence is valuable, but so is partnership. The pointed comment made Warren groan. Pa, leave her alone. She does not need advice about her personal life from you. I am just saying that life is short and uncertain. We should grab happiness when we find it, not wait around for the perfect moment that might never come. Thomas stood up, collecting plates. Now, you two go sit on the porch and enjoy the evening. I will clean up here. I can help, Caroline offered. You are a guest. Go on. Warren and Caroline found themselves on the front porch as the sun set in brilliant oranges and reds across the Oklahoma sky. They sat in rocking chairs that Thomas had clearly positioned for exactly this purpose, close enough to talk quietly but with a respectable distance between them. I apologize for my father, Warren said. He means well, but he can be a bit much. I like him, Caroline said honestly. He reminds me of my father in some ways. That same straightforward honesty. They rocked in comfortable silence for a while, watching the day fade into night. The evening air was cooler, bringing relief from the day's heat, and the sound of crickets and night birds filled the air. Can I ask you something? Warren said eventually. Of course. When you said you were scared of depending on someone again, did you just mean scared of being abandoned, or is there more to it? Caroline thought about how to answer, wanting to be honest but not wanting to reveal too much too soon. I think I am scared of losing myself. When I was courting the banker, I found myself changing to please him, becoming quieter, more agreeable, less opinionated. My father noticed and called me out on it. He said I was diminishing myself, and he was right. After it ended, I promised myself I would never do that again. I would never make myself smaller to fit someone else's expectations. Then do not, Warren said simply. I do not want a woman who agrees with everything I say or has no opinions of her own. That would be boring. I want someone who challenges me, who has her own thoughts and is not afraid to voice them. Even when those thoughts disagree with yours, especially then. How else am I supposed to grow and learn? He turned to look at her in the fading light. Caroline, I am not that banker. I do not want to own you or control you or change you. I want to know you exactly as you are. The sincerity in his voice made Caroline's heart ache with longing and fear in equal measure. I want to believe that. Then give me the chance to show you it is true. No pressure, no expectations. Just let me be your friend and neighbor, and we will see where that leads. I can do that, Caroline said softly. They talked late into the night, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their fears. Caroline learned that Warren had almost left the ranch when he was younger, had thought about going east to see the wider world, but ultimately realized that this land was in his blood, and he could not be happy anywhere else. Warren learned that Caroline had once wanted to be a teacher, had even studied for it, but her father's need for help on the homestead had taken precedence. You resent that? Warren asked. Giving up teaching, sometimes, Caroline admitted, but I also love the land. There is something satisfying about planting seeds and watching them grow, about working with the seasons and the weather. It is a different kind of teaching, maybe, teaching the earth to yield its bounty. That is a beautiful way to look at it. When Thomas finally called them in, saying it was far too late for decent people to be awake, Caroline realized with surprise that hours had passed. She retired to the guest room, which was indeed always ready with fresh linens, and a vase of wildflowers on the dresser that Thomas must have placed there recently. She lay in the comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to process everything she was feeling. She was attracted to Warren, that much was undeniable. But more than that, she liked him as a person. She liked his quiet strength, his genuine kindness, his respect for her independence. She liked the way he listened when she talked, and the way he shared his own thoughts freely. She even liked his father, whose love for his son was so evident in every word and gesture. But letting herself care for Warren meant risking being hurt again. It meant trusting that he was different, that he would not leave when things got difficult. It meant being vulnerable in ways that terrified her. She fell asleep still wrestling with these thoughts, and dreamed of shutters that would not close and wells that ran dry, until strong hands came and fixed everything, making it all right again. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. Caroline dressed and joined the Quinn men in the kitchen, where Thomas was cooking breakfast while Warren sat at the table reviewing what looked like ranch accounts. "Morning," Warren said, standing when she entered. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you." Caroline accepted the coffee Thomas handed her with grateful thanks. Breakfast was hearty and delicious, and afterward Warren saddled both their horses for the journey back to Caroline's homestead. Thomas packed her a bundle of supplies before she left, including not just the leather seal for her pump, but also some preserved vegetables and smoked meat. "I cannot accept all this," Caroline protested. "You can and you will," Thomas said firmly. "We have plenty, and neighbors help neighbors. That is how we all survive out here." The ride back was quieter than the ride out had been, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. When they arrived at Caroline's place, Warren immediately set to work on the well pump, showing her how to remove the old seal and install the new one. "It is not difficult once you know how," he explained, guiding her hands through the process. "The key is making sure everything is seated properly before you tighten it down." His hands over hers were warm and strong, and Caroline had to force herself to focus on the lesson rather than the way his presence made her heart race. When the job was complete, She worked the pump handle and cool, clear water flowed smoothly without the previous noise. "Perfect," Warren declared. "That should last you a good long while." They stood together by the well, neither seeming ready to say goodbye. Finally, Warren broke the silence. "I would like to see you again. Not just as a neighbor checking on things, but as a man who would like to get to know you better. Would that be all right with you?" Caroline took a deep breath, making a decision that both excited and terrified her. "Yes, that would be all right with me." Warren's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good. I will come by next Sunday if that works. Maybe we could have a picnic somewhere pretty. I know a spot by the creek that is real nice." "I would like that." He lingered a moment longer, as if wanting to say something more, but finally just tipped his hat and mounted his horse. "Until Sunday, then." Caroline watched him ride away, her hand unconsciously rising to her chest where her heart was beating fast and strong. She was taking a risk, opening herself up to the possibility of being hurt again. But as she looked at her neatly repaired shutters and her newly fixed pump, she thought about what Thomas had said about grabbing happiness when you find it. Maybe, just maybe, Warren Quinn was worth the risk. The days until Sunday seemed to crawl by with agonizing slowness. Caroline threw herself into her work, but her mind kept wandering to thoughts of Warren. She caught herself multiple times standing idle, staring at nothing, remembering the way he had looked at her or something he had said. She also found herself anxiously reconsidering every possible outfit she owned, frustrated by how limited her wardrobe was. She had one good dress, reserved for church on the rare occasions she made it into town, and her everyday work clothes. Eventually, she settled on a compromise, a simple blue cotton dress that was practical but also flattering. Sunday arrived with perfect weather, warm but not oppressively hot, with a gentle breeze that kept the air fresh. Warren arrived precisely at noon, riding his bay gelding and leading a second horse laden with supplies for their picnic. "Afternoon," he greeted, dismounting. "You look beautiful." Caroline felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you, you look nice yourself." It was true. Warren had clearly made an effort, wearing a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair neatly combed beneath his hat. They rode together to the spot Warren had mentioned, following a winding path through prairie grass that eventually led to a creek lined with cottonwood trees. It was indeed beautiful, the water running clear over smooth stones, the trees providing dappled shade that offered relief from the sun. Warren spread out a blanket and began unpacking the picnic supplies. Caroline was touched to see that he had put real thought into it. There was cold fried chicken, fresh bread, cheese, ripe tomatoes, and even a small jar of pickles. He had also brought a basket of strawberries that must have cost him a pretty penny this time of year. "This is wonderful," Caroline said as they settled onto the blanket. "I wanted it to be special." Warren looked almost shy, a contrast to his usual confident demeanor. "I do not do this often. Court a woman, I mean. I am probably making mistakes left and right." "You are doing just fine," Caroline assured him. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing as easily as it had that night on his porch. Warren told her more about the ranch, his plans for expansion, the challenges of managing both the land and the men who worked it. Caroline shared her concerns about her upcoming harvest, her worries about whether she could manage it alone. "You do not have to manage it alone," Warren said. "I can lend you some of my hands when the time comes. I cannot afford to pay them. Did I ask for payment?" "Consider it a neighborly favor." Caroline shook her head, smiling despite her protest. "You are too generous. I prefer to think of it as investing in my community. If you succeed, we all succeed. If you fail and have to sell, who knows what kind of neighbor I might end up with." He said it lightly, but Caroline saw the sincerity beneath the teasing. After they finished eating, Warren suggested a walk along the creek. They strolled slowly, neither in a hurry to end the afternoon. At one point, Caroline stumbled slightly on the uneven ground, and Warren's hand shot out to steady her. But instead of releasing her once she had regained her balance, he gently took her hand in his. "Is this all right?" he asked. Caroline looked at their joined hands, at the way his larger one engulfed hers, and felt that flutter of fear mixed with excitement. "Yes," she said, "it is all right." They continued walking hand in hand, and it felt natural, as if they had been doing it for years rather than for the first time. When they reached a fallen log near the water's edge, they sat down together, shoulders touching. "I have a confession to make," Warren said, staring out at the water. Caroline tensed slightly. "What kind of confession?" "I did not just happen to notice your broken shutter from the ridge that day. I had been looking for an excuse to ride by your place for weeks." He turned to face her. "I first saw you in town about 4 months ago. You were at the general store, arguing with the owner about the price of seed. You were passionate and articulate, and you were not backing down even though he was being condescending. I thought you were magnificent. You never said anything. I heard you were in mourning for your father. It did not seem right to bother you, but I could not stop thinking about you. So when I saw that shutter from the ridge, I decided it was fate giving me an excuse." He smiled ruefully. "Pretty forward of me, I suppose." Caroline considered this revelation, turning it over in her mind. She should probably be annoyed at the manipulation, however well-intentioned. But instead she found it endearing. "I suppose I should be upset that you fabricated a reason to help me." "Are you upset?" She thought about that morning when he had ridden up, how lost and alone she had been feeling, how much his help had meant. "No, I am not upset. I am glad you did it, actually. I needed help, and I was too proud to ask for it. You gave me a way to accept it without feeling like a charity case." "You could never be a charity case, Caroline. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met." The admiration in his voice made her bold. She turned to face him more fully, looking directly into his eyes. "I am glad you noticed me that day in town, and I am glad you did not give up when I was difficult about accepting your help. Are you saying you are interested in seeing where this could go?" Warren asked, hope evident in his voice. "I think I am. It scares me, but I am willing to try if you are patient with me." "I can be patient." He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture intimate and tender. "I can be whatever you need me to be." They sat by the creek until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, talking and laughing and slowly building the foundation of something that felt significant and real. When Warren finally suggested they should head back, Caroline was reluctant to let the day end. As they packed up the picnic supplies and prepared to leave, Warren caught her hand again. "Can I see you next Sunday too? And maybe during the week if work allows. I would like that very much." He helped her mount her horse, and as he did, his hands lingered at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. The touch sent warmth through Caroline's entire body, and she saw in his eyes that he felt it too, that pull of attraction and connection. Over the following weeks, Warren became a regular presence at Caroline's homestead. He would ride over after finishing his morning work at the ranch, always with some practical excuse, but really just wanting to see her. He helped her repair a section of fence, showed her a better way to organize her barn, and taught her some tricks for maximizing her garden yield. But more than the practical help, he provided something Caroline had not realized she was missing: companionship. He made her laugh with his stories, listened intently to her opinions, and treated her as an equal in every way. They debated everything from politics to farming techniques to literature, And Caroline found herself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that she had not felt in years. As summer progressed toward fall, the nature of their relationship evolved. There were more touches now, casual and deliberate both. Warren's hand at the small of her back as they walked. Caroline's fingers brushing his when she handed him a glass of water. The accidental collision of their shoulders that neither moved away from. One evening as they sat together on her porch watching the sunset, Warren shifted closer and put his arm around her shoulders. Caroline stiffened for just a moment, old fears rising up, but then she forced herself to relax and lean into his warmth. "Is this all right?" he asked, as he always did, always checking, always making sure she was comfortable. "Yes," she breathed. "It is more than all right." They sat like that until the stars came out, not needing to fill the silence with words, content just to be together. When Warren finally stood to leave, he took both her hands in his and looked at her seriously. "Caroline, I need you to know something. What I feel for you, it is not casual. It is not just attraction or convenience or any of the things that might have motivated that banker. I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since that day I first saw you in the general store, but now I am certain of it." Caroline's breath caught. She had known this was coming, had felt the same feelings growing in her own heart, but hearing him say it made it real and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "You do not have to say anything back," Warren continued quickly. "I know you need time, and I am not trying to pressure you. I just wanted you to know where I stand, so you can decide if you want to move forward or if I should step back." "Do not step back," Caroline said urgently, surprising herself with the intensity of her response. "Warren, I am falling in love with you too. It scares me to death, but it is true. I think about you constantly. I look forward to seeing you every day. When something good happens, you are the first person I want to tell. When something is difficult, you are who I want beside me." She squeezed his hands. "I love you. And yes, that terrifies me, but it is true." Warren's face transformed with joy. "Say it again." "I love you, Warren Quinn." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her tightly, and Caroline wrapped her arms around his waist and held on just as fiercely. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who had found something precious and rare in each other, committing to it despite their fears. When Warren finally pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, make sure you are certain, and then I want to marry you if you will have me. Not because you need a man to help with the homestead, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "I want that too," Caroline whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and when she did not, he kissed her gently. It was Caroline's first real kiss, the banker having been too proper for such intimacy, and it was everything she had not known to hope for. Tender and sweet and full of promise. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Warren rested his forehead against hers. "I should go before I forget myself completely, but I will be back tomorrow. I am counting on it." Caroline watched him ride away, her fingers touching her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. She had spent so many months closed off and guarded, convinced that being alone was safer than risking her heart. But Warren had shown her that some risks were worth taking, that some people were worth trusting. The harvest season arrived with its demands and challenges. True to his word, Warren sent 3 of his ranch hands to help Caroline bring in her crops. The wheat yield was good, better than she had dared hope, and the corn was solid as well. With the help, what would have taken her weeks alone was accomplished in days. Warren was there too, working alongside her despite having his own ranch to manage. Caroline would catch him watching her sometimes as she worked, a soft expression on his face that made her heart flutter every time. When the last of the harvest was in and stored, Warren suggested they celebrate with dinner at his ranch. This time Caroline accepted without hesitation, and Thomas welcomed her warmly, embracing her like family rather than just a neighbor. Over dinner, Thomas told more stories about Warren's childhood, embarrassing ones that made Warren groan and Caroline laugh until her sides ached. The easy affection between father and son was evident in every interaction, and Caroline felt a pang of loss for her own father, wishing he could have known Warren, could have seen her this happy. As if sensing her thoughts, Thomas reached over and patted her hand. "Your father would be proud of you, Caroline. You have done right by his land and his memory." "Thank you," she managed, her throat tight with emotion. "That means more than you know." After dinner, Warren walked her out to the porch, the same porch where they had talked late into the night months ago. But everything was different now. Then they had been strangers becoming friends. Now they were so much more. "There is something I want to show you," Warren said, taking her hand and leading her down the porch steps. They walked around the side of the house to a small garden area that Caroline had not noticed before. In the fading light, she could see a stone bench and several rose bushes, carefully tended. "My father planted these for my mother on their wedding day," Warren explained. "He planted a new rose every year on their anniversary. There are 30 roses here, 30 years of marriage and love." He turned to face her. "I want that, Caroline. I want to plant roses for you for 30 years and beyond. I want to build a life together, raise children if we are blessed with them, grow old watching sunsets from a porch we share." Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. "That sounds perfect." Warren reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Caroline saw a simple gold ring with a modest stone that caught the last rays of sunlight. "This was my grandmother's ring. She gave it to my mother, and my mother gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for when I found the right woman. I have found her. Caroline Kennedy, will you marry me?" Caroline's tears spilled over then, but they were happy tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Warren Quinn." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been meant for her all along. Then he kissed her again, longer and deeper this time, and Caroline let herself fall completely into the moment, all her fears and doubts melting away. When they finally broke apart, Thomas was standing on the porch with a wide grin on his face. "Well, it is about time. I was beginning to think you would never get around to asking her, son." "You knew?" Warren asked. "Of course I knew. You have been carrying that ring around for a month, checking your pocket every 5 minutes to make sure it was still there." Thomas came down the steps to embrace them both. "Welcome to the family, Caroline. You have made an old man very happy." The wedding was planned for early October, after the busy harvest season, but before the weather turned too cold. It was a simple ceremony in the small church in Taylorsville, but everyone who mattered was there. The townspeople who had watched Caroline struggle alone and were happy to see her find joy. Warren's ranch hands, who had come to respect the woman their boss loved. Thomas, beaming with pride and happiness. Caroline wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric that Warren had insisted on buying for her, pale blue with delicate white lace. She carried wildflowers from the prairie, and her hair was loose down her back the way Warren liked it. As she walked down the aisle toward Warren, who stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, Caroline thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. Her father's death, which had left her alone and struggling. The broken shutter that had given Warren an excuse to help her. The slow building of trust and affection that had bloomed into love. When Warren took her hands in his and they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring, Caroline knew she was making the right choice. This man, who had fixed her shutters and her well and her heart, who saw her as an equal and a partner, who loved her strength rather than being threatened by it, this was the man she wanted to spend her life with. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said. "You may kiss your bride." Warren did not need to be told twice. He pulled Caroline close and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they had an audience, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration afterward was held at the Quinn Ranch, which would now be Caroline's home too. They had discussed whether she should keep her homestead or sell it, and ultimately decided to keep it and hire someone to work it. The land had meant too much to her father and to her to simply let it go. Tables had been set up in the yard, groaning with food that the whole community had contributed. There was music and dancing and laughter that lasted well into the evening. Caroline danced with Warren, with Thomas, with the ranch hands, and with townspeople who wished her well. As the sun set and lanterns were lit to push back the darkness, Warren pulled Caroline away from the celebration and led her up to the house. He had prepared the master bedroom for them, adding feminine touches while still respecting the space as belonging to both of them. "Are you happy?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Caroline answered honestly. "When my father died, I thought I would be alone for the rest of my life. I thought that was what I wanted even. And then you rode up to my broken homestead with your bag of nails and your kind eyes, and you changed everything. You changed everything for me too. I was going through the motions, running the ranch, doing what was expected, but I was not really living. You made me want more, want better. Want everything." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you, Caroline Quinn." "I love you too," she whispered against his mouth. Their wedding night was tender and sweet. Two people who had waited and built a foundation of trust and respect before coming together in this most intimate way. Caroline, who had been so afraid of losing herself in a relationship, found instead that being with Warren made her feel more completely herself than ever before. The weeks and months that followed were an adjustment as Caroline settled into her new life at the Quinn Ranch. She had been so used to doing everything herself that sharing the work and the decisions took getting used to. But Warren was patient, always asking for her opinion, always making sure she knew he valued her thoughts and contributions. Caroline took on the management of the household and the garden, but she also worked alongside Warren with the horses and cattle when she wanted to. She helped with the breeding program, bringing insights from her farming background that Warren had not considered. Together they made a formidable team, and the ranch prospered under their joint management. Thomas, who had moved into one of the smaller outbuildings to give the newlyweds privacy, was a constant source of support and wisdom. He taught Caroline the family recipes and stories, making sure she knew the history of the land she now called home. He also became her strongest advocate when some of the ranch hands questioned taking orders from a woman, making it clear that Caroline was to be respected and obeyed as much as Warren was. Winter came and went, and spring arrived with new life. Caroline discovered she was pregnant in late March, and the joy on Warren's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. He became even more attentive, if that was possible, constantly worrying about whether she was doing too much or needed anything. "I am not fragile," Caroline protested one day when Warren tried to prevent her from lifting a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife carrying my child," Warren countered, taking the basket from her anyway. "Humor me, please." She rolled her eyes but could not suppress her smile. "You are going to be insufferable for the next 6 months, are not you?" "Probably," he agreed cheerfully. The baby came in late October, exactly 1 year after their wedding, as if the child had timed its arrival for maximum significance. The labor was long and difficult, and Warren paced outside the bedroom door for hours while the midwife worked with Caroline. Thomas sat with him, reminding him to breathe, sharing stories of Warren's own birth to distract him. When the baby's cry finally pierced the air, Warren nearly knocked the door down in his haste to get inside. Caroline lay exhausted but beaming, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "A boy," she said softly. "We have a son." Warren approached slowly as if afraid he might break something and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. "He is perfect," he breathed. "You are perfect." He kissed Caroline's forehead. "Thank you." They named him Thomas Henry Quinn, after both his grandfathers, and the boy became the center of their world. Thomas Sr. was delighted to have a namesake and spent hours holding the baby, whispering stories and promises. Caroline adjusted to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. It was exhausting and overwhelming at times, but when she held her son and saw Warren's face as he cradled the boy, she knew it was all worth it. As Thomas Henry grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Warren expanded the operation carefully, adding more land and more cattle. Caroline's homestead, managed by a reliable hired man, provided steady income from its crops. They were not rich, but they were comfortable and secure. More children followed over the years. A daughter they named Martha Rose, after Warren's mother, arrived 2 years after Thomas. Then another son, called Henry but always known as Hank, came 2 years after that. And finally, when Caroline thought they were done, a surprise daughter named Lily who completed their family. The house that had once been too large and too quiet for just Warren and his father became filled with noise and laughter and life. The children grew up learning to ride and rope, to tend the land and respect the animals. Thomas and Martha both showed aptitude for the ranch work, while Hank was more interested in the horses and breeding program. Lily, the youngest, surprised everyone by showing a talent for numbers and taking over the ranch accounts by the time she was 12. Thomas Sr. lived to see all 4 of his grandchildren born and growing strong. He passed peacefully in his sleep one winter night when Thomas Henry was 10, having lived a full and satisfying life. They buried him next to his beloved Martha in the small family plot on the hill overlooking the ranch, and Warren planted a new rose in the garden for every year his parents had been married. The years passed in the way they do, when life is full and busy and good. There were challenges, of course. Harsh winters and drought summers, market fluctuations that affected cattle prices, the children's various illnesses and accidents that are part of raising 4 active youngsters. But through it all, Warren and Caroline faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. Caroline never forgot where she had come from or how close she had come to a very different life. She made a point of helping other women in the community who were struggling, offering advice and practical assistance the way Warren had once helped her. She became known as someone who could be counted on, who understood the challenges of working the land and managing a household. Warren remained the steady, kind man she had fallen in love with. He never took her for granted, never stopped treating her as an equal partner in all things. On their anniversaries, he would take her back to that spot by the creek where he had first told her he loved her, and they would sit together and remember how it all began. As they grew older and their children reached adulthood, Warren and Caroline watched with pride as the next generation took over the ranch. Thomas Henry and Martha both stayed on, working the land they had grown up on. Hank started his own horse breeding business on a section of land Warren gave him. Lily married a banker from Taylorsville and settled in town but remained close to the family. One evening, years after that first broken shutter had brought them together, Warren and Caroline sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were both gray-haired now, with lines on their faces earned through decades of hard work and laughter. But Warren still looked at Caroline with the same love in his eyes that he had shown that first day. "You remember when I first rode up to your homestead?" Warren asked, reaching for her hand. "How could I forget? You were my knight in dusty boots, come to rescue my poor shutters." "I did not rescue anything. You would have figured it out on your own eventually." Caroline squeezed his hand. "Maybe, but I am glad I did not have to. I am glad you rode up that day with your convenient bag of nails. I am glad you were brave enough to take a chance on a stubborn woman who did not know how to accept help. I am glad you were brave enough to let me in, even though you had every reason not to trust anyone." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You fixed me just as much as I fixed anything for you. Before you, I was just going through the motions. You gave me purpose and joy and a family. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Caroline corrected. "That is what partnership means." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon and stars began to appear. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing, visiting for the weekend. Thomas Henry's 3 children and Martha's 2, all rowdy and loud and perfect. "We built something good here," Warren said eventually. "We did," Caroline agreed. "Something strong and lasting, something worth all the struggles and fears." "Would you do it all again? Knowing everything that would happen, all the hard parts along with the good?" Caroline did not hesitate. "In a heartbeat. Every single moment." As darkness settled fully over the Oklahoma prairie, Warren and Caroline remained on their porch, hand in hand, surrounded by the life they had built together. The shutters that had started it all hung straight and true, repaired so long ago by a rancher who had seen a woman in need and decided to help. But he had done so much more than fix her shutters. He had shown her that trusting again was possible, that love could be a partnership between equals, that letting someone in did not mean losing yourself. And in return, she had given him a full and meaningful life, children and grandchildren, a true partnership, and a love that would last until their final days. The wind picked up, bringing with it the familiar sense of prairie grass and cattle and earth. It was the smell of home, of a life well lived, of a love story that had started with something as simple as nails and wood, but had grown into something extraordinary. Inside, the grandchildren called for their grandparents, wanting a story before bed. Warren and Caroline stood, joints protesting after sitting so long, and made their way inside together. They would tell the children stories of the old days, of building the ranch, of the challenges they had faced and overcome. And someday, those children would tell their own children about the great-grandparents who had loved each other truly and built something that would last for generations. As they settled into chairs surrounded by eager young faces, Caroline caught Warren's eye across the room. He smiled at her, that same smile that still made her heart flutter after all these years, and she smiled back. Whatever happened next, whatever challenges or joys still awaited them, they would face it together. Just as they always had, ever since that day when a broken shutter and a bag of nails had brought them together and changed both their lives forever. Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Warren and Caroline grew older gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. They remained active in the ranch operations well into their 60s, though they increasingly left the heavy work to their children and grandchildren. Thomas Henry proved to be an excellent manager, bringing new ideas while respecting the traditions his father and grandfather had established. Martha married a good man from a neighboring ranch, and together they expanded the horse breeding program that her brother Hank had started. The little homestead where Caroline had once struggled alone was still producing crops, now managed by Thomas Henry's eldest son who had a passion for farming. The house had been maintained carefully, and Caroline would sometimes ride out there alone, walking through the rooms where she and her father had lived, standing on the porch where Warren had first fixed her shutters. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a way of honoring the past while celebrating how far she had come. One afternoon in their 68th year, Warren found Caroline in the rose garden his father had started so many years ago. She was tending the bushes carefully, the task she had taken over after Thomas Sr. passed. There were now 47 rose bushes, one for each year Warren's parents had been married, plus 17 more that Warren had planted for Caroline. Thinking deep thoughts, Warren asked, settling onto the stone bench beside her, thinking about how strange life is, how one moment, one decision can change everything. She set down her pruning shears and took his hand. If you had not ridden by that day, if you had decided my broken shutter was not your concern, where would I be now? You would have fixed it yourself eventually. You are the most capable woman I have ever known. Maybe, but I would have missed so much. This life, these children, you. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I would have survived, but I would not have truly lived. Warren wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Then I am grateful every day that I happened to be checking that fence line, that I saw your shutter hanging loose, that I was brave enough to approach a beautiful, stubborn woman who looked like she wanted to shoot me for even suggesting she might need help. Caroline laughed, the sound still bright and young despite their years. I never wanted to shoot you. Your hand was on that rifle. Well, maybe for a second. They sat together in the garden, surrounded by roses that represented decades of love and commitment. The house behind them was quieter now that the grandchildren had gone home, but it would fill again soon enough. There was always someone visiting, always a reason to gather the family together. We should start planning for the 50th, Warren said suddenly. 50th what? Our 50th wedding anniversary. It is only 3 years away. We should do something special. Caroline pulled back to look at him. You are already planning 3 years ahead. I want to make sure we do it right. Invite everyone we know. Have a celebration worthy of 50 years together. He cupped her face gently. 50 years with you will not be nearly enough, but I want to celebrate everyone we get. Tears pricked Caroline's eyes. After all these years, he could still make her cry with his sweet words. 50 years with you sounds perfect, and then 50 more after that. I will do my best, Warren promised. But fate had other plans. The following winter was harsh, and Warren caught a cold that settled into his chest. Despite Caroline's careful nursing and the doctor's best efforts, the cold developed into pneumonia. For 3 weeks, Warren fought the illness while Caroline rarely left his side. On a clear February morning, with Caroline holding his hand and the sun streaming through the bedroom window, Warren Quinn passed peacefully. His last words were, I love you, Caroline. I always have. I always will. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Oklahoma. Warren had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him, and the church could not hold all those who came to pay their respects. They buried him next to his parents on the hill overlooking the ranch, and Caroline stood dry-eyed through the ceremony, too shocked to cry yet. It was only later, back at the house, that the tears finally came. Thomas Henry found his mother in the rose garden, sitting on the stone bench where she and Warren had sat so many times, weeping as if her heart would break. "Mama," Thomas said gently, sitting beside her and pulling her into his arms. He was supposed to be here, Caroline sobbed. We were supposed to reach 50 years together. We were supposed to grow old and watch more grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He was supposed to be here. I know, Mama. I know. They sat together as the sun set, mother and son, grieving the man who had been the center of both their lives. The days and weeks that followed were impossibly hard for Caroline. The house felt empty without Warren's presence. She would catch herself setting two places for dinner, or turning to tell him something, only to remember that he was gone. But Caroline had learned strength over her long life, and she drew on that strength now. She had her children and grandchildren who needed her. She had the ranch that she and Warren had built together. And she had memories of 44 years of love and partnership that sustained her through the grief. She continued to tend the rose garden, adding one final bush for the year Warren died. She would sit on the bench and talk to him, telling him about her day, about the children, about how much she missed him. And somehow, in the quiet moments, she could feel him with her still. Thomas Henry and Martha insisted that Caroline should not live alone, but she refused to leave the house she had shared with Warren. Instead, Thomas and his family moved into the big house with her, filling it again with noise and life. Caroline found comfort in having her family around her, in the continuation of the traditions she and Warren had established. 3 years after Warren died, on what would have been their 50th anniversary, Caroline organized the celebration they had planned together. The whole family gathered, along with friends and neighbors from across the county. They told stories about Warren, laughed and cried and remembered the man who had meant so much to so many. Caroline stood before them all and raised a glass. Warren Quinn was the best man I have ever known. He was kind and strong and steady as the land itself. He taught our children what it means to be honorable, to work hard, to treat others with respect. He showed me what real love looks like, the kind that makes you better rather than diminishing you. She paused, swallowing hard. I miss him every single day, but I am grateful for every moment we had together, for the life we built, for the family we created. Here is to Warren, and to the next 50 years of the legacy he left behind. To Warren, everyone echoed and drank. Caroline lived another 15 years after Warren died, remaining sharp and active well into her 80s. She watched her grandchildren grow up and have children of their own, saw the ranch continue to prosper under Thomas Henry's management, and took pride in knowing that everything she and Warren had built would continue for generations to come. She spent her final days surrounded by family in the bedroom she had shared with Warren for so many years. Her children and grandchildren took turns sitting with her, holding her hand, telling her it was all right to let go. On a beautiful spring morning, with birds singing outside the window and the smell of roses drifting in on the breeze, Caroline Kennedy Quinn passed peacefully. Her last words were, "I am coming, Warren. Wait for me." They buried her next to her husband on the hill overlooking the ranch, and the entire county turned out for her funeral. The preacher spoke of a woman who had overcome adversity, who had turned a struggling homestead into a legacy, who had loved deeply and lived fully. He spoke of a partnership that had been an example to all who knew them, of a love story that had started with something as simple as broken shutters and had grown into something extraordinary. Thomas Henry, now himself in his 60s, stood to speak about his mother. "My mother taught us that strength is not about never needing help, but about having the courage to accept it when it is offered. My father taught us that real love is about partnership and respect. Together, they showed us what a life well lived looks like. They built something here that will last long after we are all gone. And every time I walk past those shutters that my father fixed all those years ago, I remember that the smallest act of kindness can change everything." The ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of Caroline and Warren's descendants. Thomas Henry and his wife ran it capably for another 2 decades before passing it to their son. Martha's children took over the horse breeding operation. Hank's descendants expanded into cattle genetics. Lily's grandchildren became lawyers and bankers, managing the business side of the family's various enterprises. But they all remembered the story of how it started. The story was passed down through generations, becoming part of the family lore. The story of a young widow struggling with a broken shutter and a rancher who decided to help. The story of how that simple act of kindness had led to a love that had shaped an entire family. The shutters themselves became something of a family heirloom. They hung on the original homestead for over 100 years, maintained carefully by successive generations. Eventually, when the house was finally torn down to make way for new construction, the shutters were saved and installed on the front of the main ranch house, a tangible reminder of where it all began. And in the rose garden that Thomas Quinn had started for his wife and Warren had continued for Caroline, new bushes continued to be planted. Each generation added their own, marking their own marriages and milestones, creating a living history of a family that had been founded on love, respect, and partnership. The legacy of Caroline and Warren Quinn lived on not just in the land and the roses and the carefully preserved shutters, but in the values they had instilled in their family. The importance of helping neighbors, the value of hard work and determination, the belief that real love is built on equality and respect, the understanding that accepting help is not weakness but wisdom. Generations later, Quinn descendants still gathered at the ranch for holidays and celebrations. They still told the story of how it all began, of the broken shutter and the rancher with a bag of nails. Children who had never met Caroline or Warren still learned their names, still understood that everything they had was built on the foundation those two had laid. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, those who believed in such things would swear they could sense a presence on the porch. Two souls, forever intertwined, watching over the family and the land they had loved so much. A woman who had needed help fixing her shutters, and a man who had fixed everything including her heart, together for eternity just as they had promised all those years ago. The story that had started in 1882, with one simple act of neighborly kindness, had created something that would last forever. Not just a family or a ranch, but a legacy of love that would never die. And every time a Quinn descendant looked at those carefully preserved shutters, they remembered that love, and they carried it forward into whatever future awaited them. That was the true gift that Caroline and Warren had left behind, more precious than any land or fortune. The knowledge that one person, one moment, one decision to help another human being could change the world in ways both small and profound. And that real love, the kind built on respect and partnership and genuine caring, was worth any risk, any struggle, any challenge life might bring.